Okay, so I believe that those on YouTube can hear me now. So, so if you can hear me, we are set for today. So today we are still talking about the, structure for Zoho APIs. Okay, data structure for Zoho APIs, and we last talk about our last talk about this was basically trying to just understand how API structures are. So we looked at Zoho Billing, we looked at Zoho Creator, and of course, we took a look at Zoho Books. So today we're going to look at something a little bit different in context. We'll still talk about the same thing, but we will work with a different context. So now, the first thing we have to know is that when working with Zoho APIs, it's important to ensure that the domain names and the API path names are kept separate in processing by your apps. What do I mean? What I mean is, let me share my screen so I can show this to you. So I'm just going to show, or let me show this window. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. It's a window in window. So now here goes. So you see these Zoho Books APIs, they all work with the same principle. You authenticate and then you call Zoho Books to do things. But it's important for you to understand that ZohoAPIs.com is a new method by Zoho to access APIs. Zoho can change this method at any time. So it's important for you to have two different ways of identifying API records. One way would be grouping by domain. Another way would be grouping by subdomain. So you can have a record of an API URL. Then you can have the difference in your app to be just the path domain or the subdomain. So when you are putting logic in your app, always make sure that you give room for API changes for subdomain and the domain after the address after the domain. That's the folder. Then you see this V3 here. It's important to take note of that. Remember the last time we were looking at the Zoho Creator API, where's that? Somewhere here. We were looking at a different version. We were looking at version 2. And I was seriously looking for something that was in version 2.1. So it's important to know what each version carries. And when a version is new, you're going to always see the what's new section by the Zoho product. If it's not here, it's going to be in a blog somewhere. Okay. So now, there are instructions in here, and it's important to note also that when you go through these instructions, a few things are going to be different across board. Apart from the fact that you can always put fields for API calls, it's important for you to understand where to put values. For example, you see this record cursor. You find out that you would have this keys value in the header response of the former API call. Okay. Now, this alphanumeric key, when included in the header, bulk fetches a batch of consecutive 200 default records. But when you go to record cursor and you find out how it is used, let's go to data API now, and let's go to get records, for instance. And then you see record cursor. So this parameter key bulk fetches a batch of the consecutive 1000 records. Unlike before, it was 200 records. So if you didn't know this and know that it came with this version, you'll be struggling with paging, which of course is a thing with getting values. You will be struggling with paging, and paging is somewhere around Let me see. I think this one doesn't have to do with paging. This one has to do with. Let me try to find the. So this says the number of records, but I am checking record. Oh, great. So what happens here is if you have an application that has more than 1,000 records, unlike before where you had to go 200, 200, 200, now you can fetch 1,000 records from the Zoho Creator API and get this value of record cluster. Now, when you use the record cluster, I'm trying to see if it was put in an example. When you use the record cluster and you put it in the header, okay, you'll be able to get the next 1,000 records from that same table. And you'll be able to group the records accordingly. So if you are doing any grouping, you would have been able to get the first 1,000 and the next 1,000 and put them as indexes in your application. So you see, this is knowledge that you should know if only you go through documentations. Then another thing that you should quickly know is that when you see APIs, there are certain things that are common among them. This API is beautifully documented thanks to the Zoho Creator team. But when you come to Zoho Books, you may not see some of those things. You see, everything is just simple communication. So you are going to have to do quite some reading to know what to do. And even the details are very simple, but they don't really tell you a lot of things. You just have to be very smart as a software engineer. But Zoho Creator API documentation is one of the most prolific that I really appreciate in all of time, Zoho, because apart from the fact that there are links to everything and there's a guideline for everything, you will see that you can easily get started with anything on the Zoho Creator. Take for instance, look at these data APIs now. So you already know that this is a post call, this is a get call for get record by ID, this is a get call for get records, this is a patch call for update records, this is a patch call for update record by ID, this is a delete call for delete record by ID, and a delete call for delete records. And it's following the real standards. So basically, this is a beautiful API documentation for anybody developing apps. Okay. Now, one of the beautiful things that I've seen with this documentation is the upload file type of documentation. So in upload file, you see that you can specify file types and limits. But you can also say that, okay, when you want to upload files, you can get the files to come as images, signature fields, file upload, audio, and video fields. So if you have files coming from somewhere else, let's say you have multi-part form data coming from your application, maybe desktop or any other application, you can actually push that data to Zoho Creator API, and the data will get interpreted. And you really don't have to worry about file management. You just need to know what the limits are. Again, you have a page with all the errors. So technically, it's important to understand that if you want to learn how to use any API product in Zoho, you need to ask yourself the question starting from Zoho Creator's documentation. Interestingly, they have put everything here. It amazes me how they made everything very straightforward in their own way. Everything we've talked about in the past is all here. Okay. Now, there's something about a server-based application. And in a server-based application, you are expected to give access to applications on the web. So, for instance, when you are using a server-based application and you want to have access to something by a Zoho customer, the customer will have to follow this URL in this instruction, and then it's going to give you the authorization code that you can use to do what you have to do. Maybe get a refresh token that you can continue using within your application. Now, the difference between a web application's permission and a server application's permission is that the server application, it is the user that grants you access. So the user is somewhere else, granting you access to their account to do something. For instance, if you are building a Zoho Creator app and you want people to have access to integrate using the app, what you simply do is that you write the code here inside the application, but that's for the app. So when they install the app, they will just run the integrations inside their account. But if the person built a different application that is not within Zoho, but the person needs to have access to your account and generate codes, instead of creating a self-client like you did, not every customer can go and start creating self-client and give you refresh tokens. That's ridiculous. So it's important for you to be able to negotiate with the client using request authentication for your web-based application. So the documentation is right here. Zoho.com/creator/help/API/fee 2.1/authorization-request.html. Or you can always go to the version 2.1 of the Zoho Creator API. Apart from doing this, you use refresh tokens accordingly continuously. At any time you do not have access, you can always tell the user to go and authorize Zoho Creator so that you can have access to their account. And when you are trying to gain access, you are going to have to put the necessary scopes in your call. So you see the scope is right here. So you have to provide the scope in your call. What do you want to have access to? And the scope is going to tell the user what you are asking for. And then the user is going to review to accept or reject accordingly. Okay? So when they accept, it's going to give your server a response that they've accepted, and you'll be able to do the things accordingly. And of course, the user can go into their account and revoke your access from their account section. So in terms of a structure for data, it's important for you to know that when you are making URL requests, you need to do that with the fact that you will register the application. So you need to register the application before you can ask users to submit such requests. So when you register your application now, what will happen really is your client ID when you register the application will be passed here. One of the authorized redirect URIs, which is what is specified when you register the application, the scope. Then the value can be offline or online. Now, when it says that's offline, you receive a refresh token along with an access token only the first time you make this request. Okay? So it's only that time you make the request. Now, consent, its value of the consent. This parameter is like, it will make the requesting users consent mandatory when they request an access token using their refresh token. So for instance, if you are telling the user that you continue to have access, you continue to have access. But if you leave this as optional, once you use the access token, you will need to come back again. Okay? So it means that if you set it as consent, yeah, then it means that the user will always have to give their consent anytime you want to request an access token. So when you want to request an access token, you need to send this to the user to make requests. And this has to be in your usage policies, because if the user complains or rejects or reports to Zoho, Zoho can also blacklist you. Okay. So this is the account server, and this is just how this works. So what is interesting about all of this is that this documentation is very detailed. Okay. But at the end of the day, the structure of the API remains the same, both for those who are using the self-client method or using the other method. Okay, so finally, now that we have addressed some of these key issues, I want us to try to address one more issue: data centers. You've seen this in the Zoho. You have seen this in the app where we used to do the authentication. But you may have not seen this for the API calls. So it's important also that when you have URLs for authentication, in your application, you also need to have URLs for API calls. And you need to respect privacy laws accordingly. If a client is in Europe and their Zoho account is in Europe, you can only access it using the Europe API. If a client is in India, you can only access their account using the India API. So always make sure that you get the right location of your clients. Ask them to specify their data center before you make these API calls, so that you don't get null values all the time. So now these APIs have limits. Even in Zoho Creator, they have limits. And for today, I'm just going to tell you about the API limits here. But I'm going to give you some hints on Friday about the API limits in Zoho Flow, in Zoho Creator, and what you should choose best for working with APIs. For now, this is going to be goodbye from my end. These days, we don't need to spend so much time building or explaining stuff. We can just get to talk. Okay? So please feel free to let me know when you have questions in the community. So here you have 100 requests per minute. Check out other API endpoints and let's know which one you cannot deal with. It will be bye from my end, and